Welcome to another episode of The Greatest Pod, where we discuss and debate what makes something great. I'm Ron Swallow.
I'm Ed Greer. And today, oh man, we have a great guest for you. A wonderful raconteur, wonderful nerd personality. You know him from his dope-ass YouTube channel, Heroes Reforged. Without further ado, give it up for our man and yours, Hector Navarro.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Great to see you. Great to hear you. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm really happy to be talking about what we're talking about because I think we've narrowed it down. Ed was very helpful in trying to pin this down, what we're talking about. So I'm very excited. Thank you.
Oh, well, I don't think I could get a better cue than that. So as you know from the title, we are talking about Marvel, but the myriad titles, what is it gonna, is it about how great Marvel is? Is that interesting radio? Is it about how shitty Marvel is? Is that honest radio?
Yeah, is it the greatest franchise of all time?
Right.
Like it's hard to pin down. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is gargantuan and has created a phenom unlike anything that I think we've ever seen before.
But I'm interested in how we got here because all of us, we don't need to date ourselves, but all of us have been here quite long enough to know that Marvel wasn't always everybody's cup of tea.
Yeah.
It wasn't always the safest bet.
I also want to say, too, to your credit, Ed, like the way that you helped me figure out what the topic that I wanted to talk about is. And thank you also, I must mention, because on every topic, I have to have an obligatory reference to 3D movies. So thank you for steering me away from that, which is uninteresting and nobody cares about that. And I also said, one of the topics is I want to talk about how the movie John Carter is good. And you're like, let's steer away from that.
Yeah.
But so, I have to mention those two things. Those are my things. But I want to go back to something that you said a second ago, where it was the way that the public seems to have voted, we love Marvel. I want to immediately, respectfully disagree and even point out the fact that we're specifically talking about Marvel Studios as an entity. We're specifically, I want to talk about the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, all that entails, because we just saw the movie Morbius get defeated at the box office by Sonic the Hedgehog 2. So I truly believe that even though the first Venom movie from Sony starring Tom Hardy made a bunch of money, that audiences, generally speaking, know the difference, or at least feel something to be like, I'm going to go check this out. I'm not going to go check this out, even if it has the word Marvel on it. And but I do understand though that Morbius only got greenlit as a movie because it's a Marvel property. And that we can talk about that whole thing about how the Sony film studio has the rights to certain Marvel characters. And they're, in my mind, kind of playing the best hand they got dealt. So I'm not necessarily frustrated on that level, but I do want to point out that just because certain products in the world have Marvel associated with it, or these movie trailers say in association with Marvel, that doesn't guarantee a success. It doesn't guarantee a high quality product. And in my mind, neither does the MCU as a whole. Just because something is from Marvel Studios that belongs a part of that franchise, it doesn't mean it is automatically going to be good. But I do want to say right off the bat also, if the thesis is the Marvel Cinematic Universe actually the greatest, my answer will be yes. And I would love to basically talk about, can we prove that or disprove it, or just kind of, attack it from all angles? Because I really strongly believe that they have made all the right moves. And I also think that my thesis is, I think that this franchise is the greatest and has made a dent in popular culture that is massive and immeasurable, because in my mind, they have just lifted what is also the greatest, which is the Marvel Comics world. And they've done it correctly. There have been Marvel movies in the past. We've all sat through Ghost Rider. We've all sat through Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer. We all remember Howard the Duck, whatever that is. But in my mind, those movies, even the early Spider-Man films with Tobey Maguire, as great as they were, the early X-Men films, in my mind, those were not Marvel films. That was a Spider-Man movie. And this was a sci-fi movie that had the X-Men name attached to it. And, you know, Blade is an awesome Wesley Snipes vampire movie. And it's a Blade movie. It's a Marvel movie because Marvel is all of those things, but it's not like a Marvel Universe movie. You know what I mean? And so Marvel Studios, I think, has made all these right calls because in my mind as a fan and as a person who studies their sort of production and how they make stuff and the decisions they make, it's all about actually adapting what is Marvel Comics. And depending on who you ask, that's a good thing, that's a bad thing. Depending on who you ask, they care or don't care about Marvel Comics. But you're listening to somebody right now who cares so effing deeply about Marvel Comics that like it was a no-brainer that as soon as the first Avengers movie came out, I went, oh, this is my favorite movie franchise of all time, because they have done what I've loved since I was 5 years old, since I was 6 years old, 7, started reading comics and learning about this idea. And also, for my money, I think that Marvel Comics has been mostly making the right moves in that regard as well for 50 years, for, you know, going on 60 years, whatever it is. So that's my thesis. That's my statement. Let's have a discussion. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. I would love to talk about the misfires, the misses of this movie franchise, the missteps. And also, you also said something, Ed, that I want to bring up too, because it was brilliant. You were like, I don't want this to be a sort of like, you know, you use some colorful language. I don't want this to be, you know, just like
I'll say it for you, a blowjob of Marvel.
Thank you.
I know Hector's a cleaner dude than us. Yeah.
But also Ed was like, I don't want it to be a book report where we just go through and we talk, oh, Iron Man 1 was so great. Iron Man 2 wasn't great. The first Avengers was so great. And I don't want to do that either. I would love to talk about the future. I would love to talk about where they're going in the next couple of years, what kinds of decisions they might be making, what kind of decisions they have to make, because I think that still really relates to where they've been and, you know, how far they've come. So I would love to focus on that as opposed to, you know, like, oh, what was their biggest thing that they did in 2017, or what was a turning point, and why were the Netflix shows really cool, and you know, all that stuff is awesome, and plenty of people have talked about it, but would love to get your guys' thoughts on like what is next.
Well, okay, before we do that, and which I agree is the best thing that we should do, but I do want to mention that I think one of the things, and this might sound controversial, but I think one of the most important thing that Kevin Feige and all of his crew has done, and it's going to sound weird, but it's not give a fuck about fans. I know that sounds weird, but 100%, they've not worried about what fans want or fans say. They focus on telling good stories. And they focus on taking the best of comic books and molding them into something that is able to be put on screen and be visually appealing to the masses in general, but to like everybody for the most part. Yeah. While also being a little bit cutting edge at the same time.
Well, I mean, and just to continue that thought, the actual synthesis of coming up with just the right things to cherry pick from 50 years of continuity. Just that whole process, the fact that we heard them making campuses of people who just sort of got up, took a shower, went to an open campus and just sort of read Thor comics all day as part of this think tank to work on what this is going to be.
Yeah.
Seeing that they took those type of that academic approach to it and trying to like grow people's minds around the material. Like, you're a great screenwriter. You understand what a screenplay is. These are these sprawling tales that Jack Kirby's doing like 4 pages a day, trying to feed his family. And we're going to base a movie off this that somebody did like, to feed their family real quick. You know what I mean? But it's brilliant in that. So what is brilliant in this that we can bring to 21st century screenwriting? That whole process, I felt like, I mean, and I do count Blade a little bit as part of that, because to me, it was the very first time I'd seen a comic book movie per se that was better than the comics, that took what the comics had and said, yeah, I don't want him to just be a light, sensitive punk who throws stuff at people and hangs out with stronger vampires all day. I don't want him to be that. I want him to be as powerful as a vampire with all their strengths and all their weaknesses, except that one with his serum. And that's his cross to bear. And that's the price of all that power, bringing it into the Marvel purview, right? You always pay for your powers in Marvel. You always pay. Right. So all that jazz, I counted as one of those because of that. And I think following that format to a certain T, and like Ron said, not giving a damn if the fans are like, but actually Hannibal King is not. No, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care
Right.
what you think.
Right. Wasn't Whistler like a character made up for the film? Right. Someone who wasn't in the comics, I
don't
thought.
remember.
Like,
I don't remember.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember Whistler from Tomb of Dracula. I don't.
Yeah.
I don't
I mean,
remember him either. So
you guys are making you're making great points about this it's really difficult thing. It doesn't sound like it's difficult if you are somebody who really studies comic books and superheroes and Marvel and DC and all of that crap. It's like telling somebody who played video games their whole life, yeah, we just can't wrap our brain around this Mario thing. They're going to look at you like, are you stupid? Just make the movie, just do it. But it's really interesting that within entertainment and Hollywood and the studio system, that we're talking now 20 years ago with movies like Blade and the first X-Men and the first Spider-Man. I don't feel that there were people working there with enough power and enough clout, the producers, the directors, who grew up with comics and who understood it at that level. And if they did, they were people like boo Joss Whedon, they're boo him, he's the worst. There were people like him who they were growing up on stuff from the 60s, 70s, and 80s and were inspired by it definitely and influenced by it definitely, but maybe the studio could never see them actually translating that from page to screen.
Yeah.
I think that 20 years ago, and I've heard Kevin Feige talk about this with a specific comic book, The Ultimates by Mark Miller and artist Brian Hitch, where he said that he read that, and that's the first time he ever thought that the Avengers could work as a concept for a movie. Because before that comic, I mean, just look at the types of comics that were coming out 20 years ago in the early 2000s that were, a lot of them were very post 9/11, Ultimates included, and they were very cinematic. They started to shift. They started to shift from being comic booky. They started to do away with that little poofy thought bubble that we were so used to, and they just became cool, sleek captions, to give us the inner monologue of a character like Batman or whatever it was. And they moved away from the more outlandish concepts, and they kind of grounded everything. And they were certainly influenced by movies, I think, Marvel, by movies like the first X-Men movie, and they were kind of sharing that with Hollywood at the same time. But I think that the Ultimate line of Marvel Comics really took everything and made it much purely more cinematic. And I think Brian Michael Bendis, as a writer for Ultimate Spider-Man, graduating, quote unquote, from that to like the main Avengers line, he was the man responsible for the Avengers being disassembled and then reassembled. And he put Wolverine and Luke Cage on the team and Spider-Woman and all this stuff, where I think that he brought a real conversational, cinematic, and kind of filmic language to comics. I think so many of those comics are what Kevin Feige was reading and looking at and going, yeah, this could work as a movie. This could work as a movie. This is what the movie should be like. This is what the movie character should sound like. That I'm almost surprised when stuff pre that finds its way into these adaptations in movies and stuff. And even with like Jack Kirby, bringing up Jack Kirby, Ed, with his Eternals, which, to her credit, director Chloe Zhao, who is fantastic. She's such a cool nerd. She's super cool. She was stoked about the Kirby-ness of it. And to me, so much of the Kirby comics are kind of impenetrable to a modern audience. How in the hell you can take something like that and try to tonally put it into a modern thing? I think that's why Thor Ragnarok just like pulled the visual inspiration, because visually Kirby is timeless. Kirby is immortal. But like the actual, when you read his Mr. Miracle, when you read his New Gods, when you read his Eternals, when you read, some of the stuff he was doing with Stan Lee, it's very of its time, and it's very like crunchy, and it's very like old school. And I still think that Eternals was definitely influenced by Jack Kirby and his storytelling. Sure. But I also think it took most of its inspiration from the Neil Gaiman Eternals comic, which I think is fine, because I think that comic book has more of the modern filmic, cinematic, take on those characters.
Modern writing has moved to a point, and since we are eventually talking about what is going to be in the future, is that they've learned that writing things in scenes so that every time a chapter happens, it's a whole scene of something that you can really grasp and feel, I think makes it easier to translate into comic books and into movies. And while I love Kirby's New Gods to read his comic books, they're very hard to turn into things because they're concepts, they're not scenes.
Right. Also you can travel 150,000 years in between the gutters of a panel. Like from this panel to that panel, it's 150,000 years later, and then this next panel we're in the future, and so on and so forth. There's all this, like, when you actually use comic books for what they're for, they become remarkably uncinematic, actually.
Yes.
You know, when you do them kind of right, so, quote unquote, they're remarkably uncinematic because they use techniques that cinema can't touch, like the weird distillation of time, the fact that you control your conception of time when you're looking at a comic book page. You can look at it for an hour or 2 seconds and flip it. You know what I mean? There's nothing worse for an artist when you draw like these pictures that take between like 16 and 40 hours and you've got like 15 of them in your sketchbook, and somebody can look at them in 10 seconds and be like, yeah, your stuff's pretty good.
Yeah,
you just want like to jump out a window. But to that point though, in regards, okay, so going to the kind of the present, I want to talk about the present of Marvel, so that by the time we're rounding it out, we can go to the future, right? Okay, at present, we are looking at a brand that is branching out beyond its original products. It'd be like if Coke said, "Man, we can't make Coke anymore because we killed it."
Yeah.
So now we have to make new Coke and Sprite and all types of shit because we killed Coke.
Cherry vanilla Coke.
You know what I mean? So yeah, so now we have cherry vanilla Coke. That's a Rhodey cherry vanilla Coke. You know what I mean? So like now that we're into the cherry vanilla Coke stage of the Marvel universe, what are some of the things that are standing out to you as far as I don't want to say missteps, but let's start around Eternals time. And maybe for some of the series on D+. I think that is a transitional point, obviously, after Endgame. One of the things that you talked about in our bullet points of this thing is, how do they top Endgame? And I am saying, I think I've made this point all the time about movies. I hate when the best scene is in the middle. I hate stuff like Face Off has a great gun battle in the middle, and it ends with a boat chase. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? After Dr. Richard Kimball kills the one-armed man who killed his wife, he has to do a whole nother act and go fight a doctor at a doctor's convention, chasing him around a desk. And it's just like, why don't you just end on the best scene with the greatest thing? So Endgame you can't beat Endgame as far as emotional impact, as far as all the build up. So I'm suggesting that like most cinema, I don't know that the end of Marvel, whenever that is determined by Endgame's greatness. Even if it is the apex, we still have so much more road to go.
That's a great point, Ed. I don't know if now we're getting to this territory of like, in what context can we talk about Marvel Studios and the MCU? In what context? Because the context currently is, well, it's a movie studio and they're owned by Disney, and the head of it is Kevin Feige, and they've got a whole group of people. Victoria Alonso was like running the visual effects and, you know, all this different talent and they're making movies alongside television shows now that are for the streaming service, Disney Plus, and they just sort of absorbed back the rights of some of the characters that are like street level heroes. So we just saw Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, come back as a cameo. We just saw Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin come back as a cameo. That's what it is. And I think it is fair to compare that to like movie studios like Universal or, you know, I was going to say Fox. Sorry, they were purchased by the mouse, or Warner Brothers or Sony or whatever. Oh, it's the same as what Warner Brothers is doing with HBO Max and whatever. But I also feel like it is like missing some context when we make those comparisons, because to me, in my mind, the most apt comparison would be to look at it as it just right next to Marvel Comics themselves. Because you just said, Ed, like Endgame is so good, how can they top it as a movie? Will there ever be the end of Marvel, you know, Studios output? Will this story ever end? And I just want to point to the comics. They're right here on my shelf. I'm pointing to them. And I'm like, this hasn't ended. And they've had to answer the same questions. And they have gone through eras and phases where you can look at the big picture and go, what are they talking about in the 60s? What are they talking about in the 70s? Vietnam, mostly. What are they talking about in the 80s? Reaganism. What are they talking about in the 90s? excess and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like that's kind of the impact of the 90s. And what are they talking about in the 2000s? Like I said, it's post 9/11. And right now, if you look at Marvel Comics, they had an endpoint as well, probably in 2015 with Secret Wars. And you could read that and go, oh, what a great end to that chapter that started in 1961 with the Fantastic Four comics. But they didn't end that. They kind of cheated and had their cake and ate it too. They ended the Ultimate Marvel universe. They ended the original world where Miles Morales came from, and they ended it, and then they just absorbed Miles because he's so great and kept going. And I look at Marvel Comics, and I've read some comics, fellas, that have, believe it or not, moved me to tears from Marvel. Love them so much. I also thought they were a perfectly beautiful fitting end to the entire Marvel story, if it is one big story and not just this huge, like, constantly evolving story engine. So when looking at Marvel, they don't have an end goal. There's no end in sight. They might say that they're going to have one, but they're never going to do that the way DC Comics has done it. DC Comics has faltered in sales, and they've gone, all right, we're going to wipe everything. We're going to wipe the slate clean. So buy this last comic because the month after that's going to be the first comic, Action Comics #1. We're starting over. We're rebooting it. And that helped them in their sales. And, that's been DC's way, and the way that they've tackled their story engine, and the way that they've tried to wrestle with their continuity and their canon and all those weird crunchy rules about their characters. But I think Marvel has been like, look, if it happened after Fantastic Four issue #1, it happened. If there's stuff that's outdated, like you watch an old episode of The Simpsons and it's like, oh, look, his across the street neighbor is George Bush. He's dead now. Like, it's just of its time, and you still have to pretend like that still happened within The Simpsons, year in the life of the Simpsons family than the past year, even though the thing is frozen in time, but they keep moving forward. Anyway, Marvel has even tried to get crunchy and explain that. Oh, we have a sliding timeline, whatever. There's some greater powers, cosmic entities that are manipulating their universe. Just read the comics. It's fine. Just read the comics. I think that they are approaching this problem to solve by looking at legacy, by looking at their characters, looking at diversity, looking at inclusivity, looking at, what these characters mean to people, and trying to meet fan demands while also trying to let everybody know, hey, you're all invited to the party. And they're clumsy at that, and they mess up. And, and a lot of their characters that end up sort of replacing, quote unquote, the more well-known characters, whether it's Amadeus Cho as the Hulk or Sam Wilson as Captain America or whatever. The tricky thing about the comics universe is it's infinite, not finite. It is infinite. So everybody who's reading those books, they go, well, yeah, but we know Steve Rogers is going to come back from the dead. You're not going to let him die. And I almost look at the MCU and I go, thank God you exist, because I think you're almost like prepping the audience for being okay with a world where Tony Stark is dead, doesn't exist, or a world where Steve Rogers is retired, doesn't exist. And that may begin to transfer over to the comics. I think Sam Wilson, when he put down the shield and he went back to being Falcon again, I think now he's Cap again. I think they're just going to have two Caps. And that may eventually lead to, well, maybe there'll be a world where Steve Rogers will really, truly stop being Captain America. I mean, we've read so many stories where he's aged back up again. And just like at the end of the movie, and he's like, oh, it's you now, Sam. And we've read that, and we've read it, and we've read it. And maybe Marvel Comics will start to add some finality to some of their characters. They have before. The original Captain Marvel is dead and not coming back. Marvel, that alien, the male hero character, he's dead, and they're not using him as the Captain Marvel. It's now Carol, in the same way that DC Comics doesn't use Alan Scott as Green Lantern. They keep going back to Hal, but that's another conversation. Like even after popular culture has been like, we like Jon Stewart as Green Lantern, we love him in the cartoon, and DC Comics continues to go back to Hal, but that's a different thing. But I think that Marvel, the brand, I don't know if they will ever straight up announce or plan for or have some kind of series finale for their franchise. And again, when you talk to movie people, that doesn't make sense in their brain. They go, no, there's going to be another Tony Stark. They've recast Bond before. And I'm going, this Iron Man is not James Bond. This is a completely different situation. They are building fan loyalty to a degree that we haven't. The last time anything came close to this was when the last Harry Potter movie was coming out, and the trailers were like, the event of a generation that has grown up with this character, the finale of a generation. And like, you can't do that with anything else. You're never going to see that with anything else. You're never going to see that with, anything. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the beauty of serial storytelling. I mean, that's the power of comics. And it's funny because I feel like nobody saw that power ever before they let Feige see it. Because the power of serial storytelling is that you always have more stories to tell.
Yes.
And I agree. One of the things that Marvel has done that is fantastic is start to have more diversity in their casting and in their characters. And it's been in the comic books for a long time. And so bringing that into the movies is genius on a bunch of different levels. Mm-hmm. For one, and I know we probably don't have a lot of people who listen to this that are conservative, but I think that it introduces a little bit of diversity into people's lives who are not always open to diversity.
Yeah.
And it does it in a way that's really fun and really interesting and isn't punching you in the face with diversity. Not that I'm against punching in the face with diversity, super fan of it. But I think when you can do it in a cool way that makes everyone just have a great time, everyone becomes a little more open to it. And then on top of that, people who have been underrepresented get to see themselves on the big screen and TV as well. Beautiful. And I just, what is better than that? It makes me super happy, and I'm getting a little choked up thinking about it because it's just a beautiful thing that they pulled off.
Have you guys been seeing any of the press behind the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once?
God, I'm going to go see it today.
Are you really?
Yeah. I've been wanting to see it. I just haven't had time. It looks fucking incredible.
It's really, really great. I really loved it. But one of my favorite things from the interviews that they've been doing is that the famous short round actor who is now grown up, Ke Huy Quan, has said that like he retired from on-camera acting until a few years ago. It was literally him watching the movie Crazy Rich Asians up on screen that he was like, oh, okay, I missed that. I want to be up there with them. I want to act with Michelle Yeoh. I want to, like that he could see it, and he felt like he was missing out. And he has talked about how great it is to see more Asian and Asian American representation in movies. And I'm sure he was referencing things like Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings and, what's been happening there. But yeah, he's very happy about him being a part of that conversation. He said, if somebody sees me in this movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and they look up and they see themselves, that he's like really, really excited about that and really happy about that. So yeah, I agree. That's all part of it. And I think that that's a definite focus in their next era, in phase 4, if you want to sum it up that way. But I want to go back to Ed talking about some of where we are right now. It is definitely a transitional period with this franchise. They did Eternals. Was it a misfire? I really enjoyed it, but I look at that movie and I go, this is not made for everybody. This is not the most mainstream thing. And I feel like they're getting into these characters, set aside X-Men and Fantastic Four, who have been unavailable to them, so not a part of their party yet. Mm-hmm. But they're getting into characters like Moon Knight or concepts like What If, where I'm going, this is not mainstream. Even in Marvel Comics, they're obscure characters and concepts, and they all have their like when I meet somebody who is a fan of Eternals from the comics, like they're a fan of any of the characters from that world, the Eternals, I'm like, you are weird. You are cool and interesting, or when I meet people who are like, Moon Knight is my guy, I go, you've read a lot of comics. You're weird. That's awesome. He is not a popular, we've run out of the characters with last name of Man. There's no more Spider-Man and Iron Man and Batman. So they're getting into this weird stuff. So I'm seeing some of the response and reaction to these stories. And I think a lot of it is great internet culture, where the internet ate up WandaVision.
Yep.
I think Loki has so much residual love for forever. Tom Hiddleston Loki is just like a Tumblr favorite. Like he's gonna crush on the internet, and he does. We'll have a crush on him. He's great. I saw a lot of love for the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but I also saw a lot of people being like, hey, this isn't this big bombastic Captain America 4. And I saw that even as a transitional show. I'm like, yeah, this isn't like he's not Cap yet. Like it's like, this feels like it is a prelude to a Captain America movie, or like a, previously on Sam Wilson's life. But I'm seeing the response, and it does make me feel like, yeah, okay, because not every one of these characters is Spider-Man or Wolverine or Venom or the Hulk or like the most popular Marvel characters, but I think it's also crazy that we've gotten to a point where fans are excited about talking about and kind of demanding like a Scarlet Witch movie. And I applaud, I'm like, kudos, like, great. That's great to focus on a character like that, who is very much a supporting character, mostly in Avengers comic books, a member of the large roster sort of team. And I think since the comics of like House of M and kind of what that character went through there, and sort of elevated her to more of she's always had this kind of dark and interesting story and kind of messed up past, but I'm really happy that like a character at that level, or the Vision, or Kate Bishop Hawkeye is in a show, in a 6-episode Hawkeye show, but it is all not clear where they're going right now. It's comic book fans going, okay, we know they're building up characters that are the Young Avengers, but they haven't announced a Young Avengers movie. They haven't set up one of those press conferences where they're like, here's phase 3, and we have the last 2 Avengers movies split in 2, and here's, this is what all is going to lead up to. It's called Infinity War, and that's what we're doing, parts 1 and 2. Yeah. So we have no idea where they're going.
Arguably, they're even doing Dark Avengers.
Yeah, absolutely. With
Black Knight and
Yelena and US Agent and
US Agent.
These characters who are maybe being recruited by Contessa Valentina de Fontaine, like who it's so crazy that character is even in any of these things. I mean, it doesn't seem like they are resting on their A-list and immediately getting to like, oh, okay, we've recast Wolverine. We got a new Wolverine. He's going to be in everything. We're doing Fantastic Four. We've got the biggest movie stars in the world. These 4 movie stars. This is what it's going to be. Yeah. So yeah, it's transitional. Ed, what do you think?
I mean, but the thing I was thinking about this whole time is obviously it's goofy as hell to say that 2 giant mega corporations that are just stomping on us like ants are actually fighting. So like this concept that there's ever this real DC Marvel outside of fans' heads, the fact that they think there's any, rivalry is kind of preposterous. But when you really look at it, it is kind of true. It's like 2 different ways to go about it. Like Batman, I would argue, Batman is as big as 5 Marvel characters.
Oh, easily.
And DC goes, you're right. He is. So we got to pound this guy home. So he's in the animated movies. He's in the regular movies. So always make sure, like, I was watching Dark Knight Rises, and I wasn't liking it, and I was mad. Mm-hmm. And I thought, and I calmed myself down by saying, this is probably the one of 10 to 12 Batmans you'll see in your life if you take care of yourself even a little bit. You'll see 10 or 12 of these.
I think that part of what we're all discussing right now, and what Marvel Studios has done and what the future is that there has been nobody historically at the Warner Brothers studio that has understood what we're talking about, understood the potentiality of these characters, and has tried to set up an infrastructure to where, hey, if we have an actor who passes away or who walks away from this role and doesn't want to do it anymore, or for whatever reason, and they're like a big popular character, we should probably populate that movie franchise with other characters so that we can, keep it going. And Warner Brothers did not consider that idea with like Joseph Gordon-Levitt's Robin or Dick Grayson or whatever, Robert Blake or whatever his character was, because that wasn't sort of a real, like, it wasn't a real commitment. It was just more of like, we want to bring in Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who Christopher Nolan just worked with, and this is Christopher Nolan's way of addressing the Robin idea, and then the movie's over. And there is a finality there, and then that franchise is over. But you look at what Zack Snyder was doing with his characters and his movies, and nobody at Warner Brothers was going, okay, cool. So you're bringing in Ben Affleck. Awesome. We love him. We love working with him. He's an older Bruce Wayne. Okay, that's cool. Awesome. But at some point, we want to keep this thing going, and we want to bring in other characters. Can we introduce or hint to Dick Grayson, Barbara Gordon, Kate Kane? Are they in play? There's nobody at Warner Brothers.
They're all dead. We killed them.
Right. Because nobody at Warner Brothers is sort of going to bat for the larger thing. And depending on who you ask, that's a good or bad thing. But what ends up happening is they have no infrastructure. Ben Affleck is going, I'm good. I'm done. I didn't like the way that went. And I'm working on myself, and I can choose to not do this anymore.
Yep.
The thing is that Ben Affleck was playing Batman, who, like you said, Ed, is as popular as 5 Marvel characters. And in my mind, he is 30 to 50% of the pillars that are holding up the DC universe. That so many things stem from Bruce Wayne, specifically Batman, the idea of Bruce Wayne as Batman, that nothing else really works. The dominoes don't fall if that thing isn't solid and good to go. The comics don't have to worry about this, because the comics can just continue to rely on, I'm talking about DC Comics, can continue to rely on, like, Batman's been active for 5 years, 10 years, 50, whatever. It doesn't matter. Batman's been around. And so all of these comic book characters over the years that have been introduced, they're already just at play. Even if we start the universe over with the new 52, boom, they're already all here. And that's a shortcut, but it's still not, because they're still technically referring to comic book stories that happened before that universe reset that you could refer to. There's no other movies that happened before Man of Steel that are considered part of the Man of Steel-averse or the DCEU. There's nothing. So they had to build everything from the ground up. And because that infrastructure doesn't exist, when it got around time to make another Batman movie, because a Batman movie equals many, many dollars, they met with people, and nobody, again, was going to bat for that shared universe concept. Nobody was meeting with Matt Reeves and going, look, we know that you may fundamentally disagree with the world that the Ben Affleck Bruce Wayne lives in, but what if we did this? What if we tweaked that? What if you could tell your story in this way? Instead, because they, as they're saying, they're a director-driven studio, even though they really effed over a director and hired another piece of shit director, that they're like, okay, just do whatever you want. That's fine. Again, when Zack Snyder was like, yeah, I want to have Robin in this movie, the Robin's dead. Nobody at the studio was going like, maybe that's not maybe we could use that. They went, okay, yeah, we don't care. That's fine.
Whatever you want to do. Yeah.
Because they're not making DC Comics universe the movie. They're letting directors come in and do whatever they want.
And let's talk about how huge a mistake that is. Let's break our own universe right now. Say we have someone playing Dick Grayson in that whole thing in the background, in the background of Justice League.
Sure.
Well, now when Batman's gone, he dies, let's say. Yeah. Well, Dick Grayson now has to replace Batman. Now you have a storyline where Dick Grayson doesn't feel strong enough, doesn't feel smart enough, doesn't feel badass enough to replace Batman. So you have a whole movie where you can tell the story of someone having to replace their icon and becoming that icon.
And the other, like, weirdly important thing, not just for financially, but like on the creative side, this is also weirdly important, is that every new Star Wars piece of media is still always going to include the original Star Wars movies. They are canon. They happened. You can always go back to that. That's a mine you can continue to well.
Yep.
A well you can continue to mine.
Both.
And I think that, like, what you're just describing, Ron, it's like, imagine if there was movies that kept coming out that really did refer to Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, and Justice League, and The Suicide Squad, and Man of Steel. And those movies kind of exist because, like, James Gunn's Suicide Squad is that. So's the Birds of Prey movie by Kathy Yan, and I really love that movie.
Me
and
too.
So's conceivably Aquaman 2 and Shazam 2, and all that stuff's really great. But it's weird because those movies are being made by folks who are grabbing onto one thing and being like, cool, I'm making my Aquaman stuff. And it doesn't feel as though the studio, in my mind, has the sort of confidence in the brand or the know-how to kind of navigate this thing and to keep it going for years on years on end, that they're just like, great, James, hey, whenever we can figure it out, whenever we get around to it, whenever we can schedule it, you'll do Aquaman 2, and then, who knows? And then we'll go from there. And when they just pivoted to just do a reboot of the Batman, or when they just pivoted and let Todd Phillips do Joker, I think that those movies, I dislike Joker, but there's a lot of interesting stuff in it, and it has a gorgeous score, and there's great performances in it.
And it looks beautiful.
And I didn't love the Batman, but I really liked the Batman, actually. I liked it. And I think Matt Reeves is a great director, and I think Robert Pattinson, I think, again, everybody did a great job, but there's specific things that don't line up with what Hector loves that are in that movie. But I do love how he didn't kill people, and they made it a point to do that. But like, when they pivoted to rebooting that, imagine if there was a world where Matt Reeves could tell a similar-ish story, but it's still tied in with what they had been working on for years. Yeah. And the difference is that if you don't love the thing they've been working on for years, you're happy that it's rebooted. And if you love that thing, you're kind of bummed that it's rebooted, because it's this feeling of like, well, I invested this time. But like you said, Ed, you got to calm yourself down as a fan. You go, whatever, Christian Bale's Batman. It's a fun 3-movie romp. Who cares? It's like the same as popping in an old episode of the 60s Batman show. How can you get mad at that? It's charming as all hell. How are you going to get mad at Vincent Price playing Egghead? It makes no impact on your life. It makes no difference.
Spider-Man went No Way Home somehow took movies that I didn't like for the most part and made me like them.
Isn't that insane?
Amazing. It's amazing.
Here's the other thing. The other thing we're talking about, it's like Warner Brothers is going to dabble in this. Warner Brothers is trying to actually address this dumb bullshit fanboy stuff we're talking about by putting out a Flash movie and being like, okay, you want your Batman? Here's Michael Keaton. And I love Michael Keaton as Batman in those movies. I just don't see that meshing tonally. I will say, Ron, I'm glad you brought up No Way Home, Spider-Man No Way Home, because like I maybe would have thought that those things wouldn't mesh. But truthfully, the PG-13, me too. But those worlds and the tone of those worlds, and even the actors in those worlds, Willem Dafoe, Alfred Molina, Tobey Maguire, Thomas Hayden Church's voice, Rhys Ifrin's, his voice, but Jamie Foxx. But Jamie Foxx was smart because he's like, I'm just going to do a completely different performance. And everyone was like, cool. Like everyone was like, great. And him talking about that, he's like, listen, I was blue before, my crew still rolled with me, but now they're like, okay, now we see you. Like, that was really, really, it almost felt like, again, Marvel Studios has just nailed this formula and nailed this tonality so well that they were able to go back and almost remake or fix the mistakes of very successful Spider-Man films by Sony. And even the Sam Raimi ones that you're going like, what did they need to fix there? Well, they killed off those villains. Yeah. Because they didn't have the forethought to build up to the Sinister Six. So here is whoever the genius was who produced Spider-Man No Way Home or wrote it or directed it, whose ever idea it was to be like, let's find an excuse to bring back Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina and actually have them talk to one another like they know each other. Because you know what? They should know each other because they're all Oscorp. It's fanboy fireworks in your brain and you're going, why didn't they do this in 2004? Because they didn't. That's not how movies were made. But these aren't movies, they're Marvel comics being adapted. That's the key difference.
Well, and just to seize on that point though, okay, so that's what's going on right now, is this an extension of the sort of the universe is expanding. Right, the Marvel universe is expanding in all these different directions. So we got new Captain America, we got Kate Bishop to replace old Hawkeye who wants to go home for Christmas, yada yada. So I get all that, but is it actually, as a Hulk truther, I think it's one of those things where you see the casualties of this beautiful, wonderful, perfect universe. And I do kind of want to talk about a couple of the sins of Marvel, because there was a Twitter thread. Somebody said one of the original sins of the original Marvel universe was everybody was white. And so that has made them have to do all this diversity push and replace certain characters or the whole tiki torch guy, you will not replace us. To sideline certain characters for a little bit, to introduce another character, and there's all this talk about how with the contract structure, even with royalties, are you going to? I'm Black creator. I'm wildly creative. Am I going to go to Marvel and give them my best, dope, good, original, new Black character? Fuck no, I'm not.
Right.
Fuck no, I'm not. I'm not about to sit my Black ass in the theater and watch myself be in the fucking special thanks under the janitors and shit.
Here's your check for $5,000. Thank you so much. We invited you to the premiere. Here's your check for $5,000. Oh, the movie opening weekend made $11 billion. It's rough.
So that's like a big.
Meanwhile, there's an artist living in an apartment. Yeah. In a and not even like in LA, like in Oregon, just because that's where he can afford an apartment on his drawing. It's like fuck.
Yeah. So I'm getting paid. So if I'm a famous writer, I'm getting paid more than the Argentinian fellow that they have on Fiverr doing this shit for exposure. Yeah. You know what I mean? And all I'm saying is all that to say, I understand that there are sins of the Marvel, of this whole Marvel enterprise, one of which is the jacking of creators and the whole iterative nature of comic books, giving them an infinite well that's already paid for. Ideas that are already all the way paid for in most respects. That's a brilliant scam right there. That's up there with the fucking railroads and the cotton gin.
Well, and it's the dangers of corporations, by the way, because they don't think of things in morality. They think of things in what is allowed. And
have you guys have you guys talked about on this podcast or previous iteration of you guys sitting in a room talking together about that sort of loophole when it comes to, I think it came to prominence and we all kind of heard more about it when it was brought up with the Arrowverse TV shows. Have you guys talked about this? Where Killer Frost is on the Flash show, right?
Yeah.
But the Killer Frost that is on that show is a female character. So because Killer Frost as a character, when invented for comic books, was the male version, and this character comes after, they don't have to pay the original creator in the comics because this is a different version. This is the female version. This is not the male Killer Frost. But then the loophole is, okay, well then are you going to pay the person who created Caitlin Frost or whatever her name is in, the second character? The loophole then is, no, we don't have to pay that person because they didn't create Killer Frost. It's this weird.
Wow.
And when people started talking about that online, that loophole, it's enraging. It's so frustrating. And the other thing we've heard about is that, that Ed Brubaker made more money as an actor in the background of Captain America, the Winter Soldier, like in a cameo capacity, has made more money from that job than anything that he was paid for whilst writing and creating the Winter Soldier. And he did, he didn't create Bucky Barnes, but the Winter Soldier is a character he created, right? Bucky was created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon back in the 40s in 1941 or whatever, in the first issue of Cap. But you hear that stuff and you go, dude, it's not like I think that Ed Brubaker should be paid as much as as Sebastian Stan.
Yeah.
But I'm like, when we're hearing that Disney or Marvel or whoever sends the creators a check for $5,000, I'm going, you can at least add a couple zeros to that. If one of these creators got a bonus check of $50,000, that's a drop in the bucket for their opening week. That kind of, when you start to look at those,
to them, and it means everything to the creator.
Yes. Like there should be some system set up where it's like, who's the creator? What's their income right now? Like what city do they live in? What's their, do the math where you go, what's your comfortable, here you go, a year of wherever you live in what American city or city around the world. Here you go, just for creating this character. Plus we're going to invite you to the premiere. And I feel like then Marvel Comics creators would be like, oh, hell yeah, on board. Like, let's all be part of it. But it's such a bummer when you hear these stories. It's heartbreaking. It's frustrating.
And look, I know right now that Marvel executives are listening to this. And I want to point out to you. I want to point out to them. Think about the long-term future.
Yes.
If you think about the long-term future and you take care of creators, they will keep creating for you. And you cannot hide the things you do anymore. if enough people hear about this and stop supporting you because of those things, it will cost you money.
Okay,
but Ron,
I just want to just as a quick counterpoint, you're probably going to come in too. That's not going to happen because people don't care.
People are going to.
I was going to say, Ron, it sounds like you're challenging them. Don't challenge them. Don't test them because they will be like, we'll do it ourselves. We'll make up characters. Okay, we don't have the rights to Moon Knight. Okay, here's Sun Girl. Don't challenge them because they will.
Good point. That's a good point.
Because they'll be like, hey,
although again,
yeah.
I think the power of Marvel, and this sounds, I'm not trying to suck the dick of this gentleman, but I think it's that they have Kevin Feige, who's an actual comic book fan.
And I agree.
I hope that he's out there trying to argue for some of these guys getting a little more money. I hope that that's happening because he's a real fan. But
we also saw that, according to the press, and if it's not true, it's very good press. And here's the other thing about Kevin Feige is that Papa Feige knows how to do press. This guy knows what to say and how to say it. And it feels like he's had training. He's so good at it. Mm-hmm. I'm truly giving him a compliment. I think he's fantastic. And I think everybody else who works at his level could learn so many things from how he does what he does with press. But we've heard that he was apparently arguing for Scarlett Johansson to get paid during the pandemic because of the Disney Plus streaming deal, that he was really mad that she, took Disney to court, that he was apparently really get this woman happy with this deal. That we've heard some of that kind of stuff from him behind the scenes. I just want to say also too, for the Disney or Marvel executives listening, that having the creators happy is better PR, and better PR is more worth it to you than a second boat. That's all I'm going to say. That again, it's a drop in the bucket. Get these people, get these creators taken care of, especially because now they are raising a generation of people on their movies and IP that love Marvel as much as I do, as much as you guys do, that they're going to grow up and be like, I want to go write for Marvel Comics. And that's really exciting. When they get there, don't crush their dreams. When they get there, let them know, hey, you create a character and it really takes off and ends up in a movie, you'll get $50,000 bonus and be able to, just like you'll get taken care of. You'll get a year's bonus or whatever if it goes there. Because, it always comes back to the comic books. And I do want to say too that Marvel Studios, at least creatively, it does feel like it's a challenge because people are pointing to Hawkeye and they're going, you guys are ripping off the titles, the logos from the artists. It's definitely, but Matt Fraction,
David Aja,
but Matt, and the interesting thing is Matt Fraction hired as a consultant on that show.
Yep.
Not because Marvel reached out to him, but because Matt Fraction was friends with Seth Meyers, and Seth Meyers was friends with the director and showrunner because he was coming from the New York SNL world, and was like, oh, let me introduce you guys because you're doing Hawkeye, and I'm friends with the guy who wrote this book that you're basing it on. You guys should meet. And then through that was he hired as a consultant. And I'm sure he probably got pretty well paid. But did David Aja get paid? It's wild. And again, another thing I'll throw out there for that Marvel executive listening, for the Disney executive, Stan Lee has passed. We had an amazing Kelly Sue DeConnick cameo in Captain Marvel. Just do that. Just hire them, because that payday of them having a background bit or a line the way Stan Lee did, get them SAG-AFTRA availability or eligible or whatever, like put him in that system. Hollywood is just this weird thing that there are so many ways to make a bunch of money, but everybody who lives out here is poor except for the people who live up on the hill. But there's all these weird little opportunities and loopholes and different stuff. Bring on the comic book creator, pay him to fly him out to Atlanta, Georgia, where you're filming the movie or whatever, or the TV show. Have him do a background cameo, walk by, say a line, oh, hey, nice suit, or whatever dumb little winky, thing. And then they'll get paid for that. And at the very least, when they get paid for that, and then they get their little bonus check of $5,000, they can be like, yeah, whatever, sure, I'll cash this. But this was nice. So
and it's experience for everybody. Also, with people like David Aja, we talked on briefly on our Hawkeye episode. Why don't you just kind of have him be like, for that title sequence, this is my design theory that I was thinking about for that. And then the people go, yeah, we get it. And you go, yeah, I know you get it, but I just made X amount of thousands of dollars. So I'm going to go draw in the corner while you guys execute this thing that I don't know how to do.
Absolutely.
And it's like, oh, well, we're sorry we're being such a dickhead to you, David Aja. Do you want to watch us do this thing? And now David Aja has this new screen printing skill that he can add to his comics repertoire, or he can work in movies later or whatever. I love this idea of giving him these kind of mafia jobs where you're just like, hey, I'm at the docks. Hey, I'm at the docks. I go get a sandwich. I get 12 hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That
absolutely.
do that for these creators. So as we start to go into the actual future, we've gotten a little bit to what they're doing now. So the actual future, I just want to talk about what I conceive of what the future actually is real quick. Because I think in the end, we're not talking in phases anymore. I really think they're going to start phasing out phases because it's going to get too cumbersome. A phase VIII or whatever. You know, just stop it.
Like the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's going to be an indicia. So okay, so stop that bullshit. In the actual future, do you think that they're going to, like, what's the lowest level characters that you think are actually going to be on screen? And what do you think the criteria is for a show versus a movie? Because I think it's a beautiful thing that they did Moon Knight as a show. Mm-hmm. I'm not trying to be a mean dickhead, and I'm not trying to be a person who capes for the original Moon Knight conception of being sometimes sort of a Bruce Wayne, sometimes sometimes that. I will say in the comic books, what I enjoyed was that mostly Mark Spector was a crazy fuck. Mm-hmm. And maybe crazy is too pejorative now, but he was unbalanced, and he kind of reveled in it in one of his identities, much like the Batman did, much like Spider-Man does sometimes, frankly. You revel in a certain part of your personality as part of this other identity. But then there was this extra thing of, well, I did sort of get way more hardcore at this and get the idea for a dope costume and stuff while I was almost died in Egypt. Mm-hmm. And I feel a little stronger on the full moon. And sometimes I kind of wake up different places. You know, it started to get more interesting than Batman in that respect. It started to be its own thing. And I just feel like now in the show, it's like, he's sort of a cosmic dude that fights dogs and stuff people can't see. And before it was like a mercenary who may or may not have been crazy and may or may not have been getting help from a super god.
Khonshu may or may not be real. Right.
Right. That to me was where it was at. And now that Khonshu is real as fuck and powerful as fuck, why is Moon Knight ever losing? Why now Moon Knight has more superpowers than he ever had in the comic books, except for certain times where he would steal other people's powers in certain adventures, you know, to kind of Batman him up to put him over. So I'm just asking, I think with 2020 hindsight, I'm 3 episodes in. Yeah, I might have made this 1 hour and 50-minute movie. And I think it might have been a more focused thing. Because, again, I'm 3 episodes in, and each of the episodes was the same fucking thing over again. I don't think I'm crazy in that. So I just feel as though maybe that's a movie, but it was not popular enough to do the box office that a movie would be necessary. So all that I just said to go, okay, now how, with that metric I just provided, what sort of things do you think will be movies and TV shows in the future, and why? And that's where we're going to leave it for this episode of The Greatest Pod. Have no fear. Hector will be back next week for us to finish our conversation about the Marvel Universe and its greatness as well as its sins. I hope that everybody enjoyed this episode. I hope that the Marvel stands enjoyed the shots that we took at the franchise. I hope the people that hate Marvel and Disney were able to find something instructive in our dissection of exactly, you may hate it, but there are reasons why this Marvel / Disney / Feige, whatever, formula is working. So thank you guys for supporting our podcast. We are growing by leaps and bounds. I would love to see more reviews. A 4th of you drop reviews. It would be like an avalanche. I'd love for an 8th of you to join the Patreon so that we can keep making this content and so that we can expand our powers, maybe hire somebody to do some editing so our YouTube videos can get spiffed up, you know what I mean? And join our Instagram. The Greatest Pod is on Instagram as The Greatest Pod. Go ahead and join our Instagram. I'm going to dump a bunch of art there this weekend, right before you see this episode. So again, thank you for listening to another marvelous episode of the greatest.